May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. Today is another in a series of sad, wearying, and infuriating days of officer-involved shootings of African American men. Yesterday in Atlanta, 27-year-old Rashard Brooks was killed outside a Wendy's restaurant after police officers tried to arrest him. Mr. Brooks resisted arrest, ran in the direction away from the police with a taser gun he had taken. Mr. Brooks allegedly shot the taser toward the police, who then fired 3 shots at Mr. Brooks while Mr. Brooks was still running away from the direction of the police officers. The police took 2 or 3 minutes. The police then fired 3 shots at Mr. Brooks while Mr. Brooks was still running away. And the police took 2 or 3 minutes picking up the bullet casings before administering first aid. Mr. Brooks died in the hospital minutes later. Following the killing yesterday, citizens gathered for protests. The restaurant was set on fire. Once again in American life, not only was there the unnecessary death of a black person at the hands of a police officer. I invoke the memory of George Floyd's killing and Breonna Taylor's killing. There were legitimate and understandable protests. Protests that expressed the outrage of a pattern of unnecessary killing. Unnecessary killings of African American citizens. And in and among the protesters were persons who tried to turn the protests into occasions for destruction of property. Many of our valued spiritual thinkers have made the point that not only are we contending today with the spread of coronavirus in our beloved country and world, we're also contending with the spread of a virus of the devaluation of African American life. This virus carries the mentality that black lives do not matter and are not valued as much as the lives of white persons. This is the virus of structural racism, and these twin viruses are killing us. This sermon is about the spirituality of the statement that black lives matter. Jesus consistently focuses on being in solidarity with those who are most vulnerable, most devalued, and most unguarded. Jesus notes that one of the values of the Good Shepherd always is that such a shepherd leaves the 99 sheep who are protected and goes out and seeks and secures the life of the one sheep who is vulnerable, devalued, and unguarded. Jesus also singles out to illustrate those with whom he is in solidarity, those who are sick and hungry and thirsty and strangers and naked and imprisoned and homeless. Jesus teaches that when we minister to and live in solidarity with these and others who are, quote unquote, least of these, or the most vulnerable, devalued, and unguarded, we have done that to him, to Jesus himself. And that we have entered into kingdom life when we are in solidarity and uphold the least valued, the most vulnerable, and the unguarded. That happens to be the central agenda of St. Luke's church. Solidarity with those who are the most vulnerable, devalued, and unguarded. That has been the marching orders. Those have been the marching orders, the sacred contract of this church, particularly and most notably from the rectorate of Tom Bowers on through and up to including this day. This church has a sacred contract, the holy job to say to the world when lives are being devalued, to say that these particular lives matter. So when the world is saying in its practices that black lives do not matter as much as other lives, it is our sacred contract with God in the Spirit of Jesus Christ to say, black lives matter. I rush to say that that is not enough. It is not enough to say black lives matter. That may give many people visceral satisfaction to say that, and it is true, and it is not enough. Jesus was profoundly critical of those who said the right things and did nothing about it. Jesus said, "Those who say, 'Lord, Lord,' will not enter the kingdom of heaven, but rather those who actually go out to guard the vulnerable. Those who actually relieve the horrors of those whose lives who are demeaned and treated harshly and are told in word and deed that their lives are inferior to others because of their skin color." In other words, this sacred contract that you and I have with God means that you and I have sacred jobs, essential jobs today. No matter what our training, no matter what our age, no matter what our ability, it is clear that during this 400-year-long pandemic of white supremacy and this pandemic of COVID-19, which is disproportionately killing the lives of people of color, you and I have essential jobs to do. We read in the gospel lesson today of Jesus calling his disciples. It is Call Sunday. And what is amazing is that when he calls them to go out and be healers. You and I are called to heal this country and our heart and every system of structural racism and inequality and everything else that hurts God's children. I love to read the call story because it reminds me that Jesus never calls the qualified. God qualifies the called. So the way God qualifies us who are called, who may not have a lot of confidence in our abilities, there are three things God is calling us to do to consent to his call: to learn, to pray, and to act. Those are the three paragraphs, sections of our sacred contract with God. A quick word about each one, my friends. As you consider what your divine contract with God is in the face of these two twin crises, let me invite you to learn. To learn everything you can about structural inequality, racism, police practices, the beloved community, and a new way of living life and doing religion. We are offering learning experiences here every Sunday and every Wednesday. Please join us. And our partner, Dr. Catherine Meeks, at the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing, is offering classes and webinars left and right, and this Thursday begins a new one on police practices. Please learn. The second point is to pray. Prayer is about tuning your heart to sing God's grace. We just sang that glorious hymn in which we ask God to tune our hearts to sing God's grace, not to sing any other ideology but grace. Not an ideology of fear, not an ideology of discrimination, not an ideology of bigotry, not an ideology of going back, but an ideology of grace, which is always creating a whole new heaven and earth. Pray that your consciousness may be filled with grace. Our brother Albert Einstein says that no one can ever solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created that problem. No, you can't stay the same and solve an age-old problem. We have to have two new minds, new consciousnesses. We have to have a heart that's tuned to sing God's grace, not any kind of ideological or religious hierarchy of caste, of race. So please, in your gathering together on our weekly noonday prayers in Compline, our Sunday services, your own daily life of contemplation, let your central prayer be, tune my heart to sing your grace. Give me a new mind. Give me a new consciousness. And God will use you. And finally, act. We have a wonderful organization here at St. Luke's called Faith and Advocacy Network. People who are brilliant, experienced people in all of the issues that hurt the family of God. Sign up for their notices and be called into action. Faith without works is dead. Act. Finally, I want to invoke that amazing first lesson we had. God told Abraham and Sarah that though they were elders, they were going to have offspring that would be a blessing to the entire nation. And Sarah laughed at God. She who laughed at God. God says, I heard you laugh. Oh, I didn't. Oh, yes, you did. However, the takeaway is nothing is too extraordinary for God. Nothing is too hard for God. God can use every one of us modest, humble people to heal this nation. It is not too extraordinary to bring an end to racism. Oh, you have to go through suffering like the lesson says. All of this brings on suffering, but suffering brings on perseverance. And perseverance brings on character. And character brings on hope. every time one more person goes through the awareness machine, the consciousness machine, the waking up machine of suffering, perseverance, character, and hope, the world has more hope to turn the human race into the human family. That is our call. That is our glory. That is our exhilarating divine contract. God is bringing you to who God meant you to be according to the lesson. Consent. Consent. Consent by learning, praying, and acting. Amen.